Hey guys, welcome to another video. It's VaulSC here. Not going to do a bat rep this time. We're not going to talk about the stats and the army list. We're just going to have a bit of a conversation. I'll probably be going off on a bit of a tear, a bit of a rant. Hopefully a bit of a structured way. I had a bit of a think about some talking points I wanted to get through. This is a topic that comes up all the time in infiNity. We're on the new forums now. The old forum, I believe, has been closed down, and the new forum can be reached at forum.corvusbelly.com, blah, blah, blah. I noticed recently that there was a member who has communicated with me. He decided to post one of my videos on the forums, and it generated a topic which, as of this video, is 17 pages long. It had to do with a YouTube video which I released, and which is on my page right now. You can go and check it out right now if you want to, called infiNity Intent Play and Pie Slicing Discussion. That was back in April the 11th, 2017. What is it, 11th of January? So that's it's the anniversary, the same day of the month. So if you haven't already, maybe go check out that video first and understand what that was all about before watching this video, because this is sort of a follow-up video. What is it? A whole bunch of months later, 9 months or something like that. In that video, just to summarize it, I was talking about what we sometimes call intent play, and I was talking about pie slicing as a term and sort of conflating them, sort of rolling those two issues together. And it had been mentioned to me after that I probably should have talked about them a bit more separately, which is a good, reasonable point. In infiNity, sometimes you'll be in a situation where you're moving your model around and you want to avoid certain face-to-face rolls because it's a very lethal game. You can easily get your model shot. So as you're coming around a corner, you might want to just move just far around enough so you get line of sight to one model but not other models. And in all practical purposes, you can easily do that. It's just that it becomes easier to do that without having to fidget around and check line of sights for too long by simply declaring to your opponent that you're intentionally going to move in an abstract way to a certain point and have them, agree with you that you can be doing that and ensure that that happens. So the video sort of talks about how, on the one hand, some players like to have a sort of conversational approach to that and have an abstract sort of setup that allows the game to be played in one way, shall we say, and other players prefer to simply take a more practical approach where you physically move the models and you talk about the exact location and the measurements and the actual spatial side of the game exclusively. So that's what I talked about in the game. Intent play is not exactly that. It's a slightly different. It's got a slightly different definition, and we're going to talk about it a little bit more in this video. So my follow-up video today will be more to do with the intent side of it, and intent as a general concept in infiNity games, whereas I'm going to leave pie slicing to one side a little bit, and because my previous video covered that off a bit more, we're going to leave that there. Okay, before I move on, the other talking point that I wanted to cover is that this is a forum bingo issue. Those of you who have been on the forums for quite a while will see the same recurring topics come up again and again. This particular topic is a little bit like a religious or a political topic. You know the one, you're sitting there and you're observing a very left-wing politician talk to a very right-wing politician, and the conversation is mostly name-calling and insults and criticism and agenda talking points that are very pre-formulated, and there's very little progress made on the actual objective issues. That is also the case with these infiNity threads, which are about the controversial stuff like this. There are a lot of people who contribute to these threads who always seem to act like they're breaking new ground, and this is the first time this is being discussed. I mean, on these forums, you see so many closed threads and so forth about this, and it is also done to death in private Facebook groups and other social media and forums and websites. So this is not the first time you'll be seeing this issue. It's not the last time you'll be seeing this issue. And I also find it regrettable how negative people get on these forums and how much people tend to get bashed up over the issue. So I wanted to actually just point that out. No doubt my name gets thrown around a little bit because I make YouTube commentaries about it, but there you go. Anyway, let's get into the discussion. Let's talk about intent play. So we know what pie slicing is. Let's talk about the difference between using this this mannerism or this method of playing infiNity compared to the alternative of not doing that. I think it's best if we focus on some examples. Let's say that it's my turn and you're playing against me, and I declare I'm spending an order on one of my models, and that model's going to move. And let's say I'm activating this model. The first short skill is going to be a move, and it's going to be moving in this direction towards this specific location, and I'm going to be going my full 4 inches. I've declared that. Okay, the next step is we work out where that model goes, and then you tell me if there are any arrows. Now, that's a nice, clean and fair way of doing it. There is an argument to be made. Some people feel that the rules explicitly require you to do that and nothing but that. What it results in sometimes is a situation where you find out that your model ended up somewhere that you didn't want it to end up. And explicitly, what sometimes happens is that your model attracts the attention of certain arrows that you didn't want it to attract, and you get shot, and bad times. You've made a mistake, you've paid the price, and the game continues. But you may also be able to do that to your opponent as well. You might have set up some really good arrow traps, and your opponent runs into them. And you have a back and forth, and that's infiNity, and a lot of people really like to play like that. The alternative to that is where you declare that you're spending the order on your model, and you tell your opponent in a conversational way what you want to actually achieve in an abstract way, without so much going to the extent of having to nut that out physically initially. So, for example, I'm saying, I have my model here, and I'm going to spend an order on it, and the first short skill is going to be a move short skill, and I'm going to be moving over there behind that blue wall with the poster, and I intend to stay out of line of sight. I don't want it to move any fire lanes. I don't want it to attract any arrows. Can I achieve that? And you ask your opponent to take part in that conversation with you. Now, your opponent might be willing to play ball with you and might be willing to play that kind of infiNity with you. And your opponent may say, hey, actually, if you move in that direction next to that wall with the poster on it, then, well, you'll get shot by my sniper over here, the Tureg sniper in the corner up in the building there. It has a really awkward line of sight horizontally through the battlefield, and I can't blame you for not seeing that, because you're sitting over there physically on the side of the table, and I'm sitting over here, and there's a lot of terrain over there which is blocking your line of sight to that model, and unless you could have walked around the table a couple of times and looked for it, I mean, I haven't painted my model, and it's sort of blending into the terrain a bit. I just want to let you know about that model, so if you do go through with that and move over there, you will come into that arrow. And then the conversation continues. It comes back to you and you say, oh, okay, well, thank you for informing me of that. That's what I expected to hear. In that case, I'm not going to go ahead with that. I'm not going to move through that order. I'm going to do something else. So we've played the game in a very conversational way there. We've basically, our opponent's let us off on the hook. Our opponent has tried to not take advantage of us and gotcha there, and just really penalize us for missing that model. And that saved us from having to very carefully get down and sort of look at all the sight lanes and walk around the table and just be very careful about that very simple move before actually doing it. And as the game continues, by simply having that very short conversation, a few seconds long, we have avoided in the long term quite a lot of that. Give you another example. Let's say I intend to move up and my opponent says, hey, look, are you sure you want to move up in that way, because you've now come into range of a 8-inch zone of control of a crazy koala, which is behind a wall. It's a very tiny model. It's just sitting there, and you couldn't have seen it unless you'd physically walked around and actually seen that model. So you sure you want to move over there and take that arrow? Yes or no? And then you can decide. So that is playing where you simply discuss your intent as to what you want to achieve in a very abstract way, as opposed to just letting the physical side of the game play out and for us to commentate on it later. A few other quick examples which are very, very similar, just derivations of that. Let's say I walk around a corner and my opponent had previously placed a mine there, so we both knew it had to have been a mine, and my opponent simply reminds me that that camo marker was in fact a mine and not like just a regular trooper. So I go, oh yeah, you did do that, right? So I'm not going to do that. And just bringing pie slicing back in for a second, let's say I simply declare that I'm moving just far enough around the corner to see your war core without seeing your TR bot. they're sort of placed relatively close together on a particular wall, so I want to be able to come around and just see one model without seeing the other, and I intend to do that. Do you think I can achieve that? Yes or no? Oh, yes, I can. Okay, well, I'm going to be doing that. As opposed to very finely moving my model very carefully, or actually looking at it and judging it and going, okay, it's 3.75 inches to get far enough along the wall so that I'll have the exact line of sight with the silhouette to that war core and not the TR bot. Now, if you have played war games for a decade, like I have, if you've played very difficult technical games like Warhammer Fantasy and War Machine, you'll be very, very good at doing that. And physically, I'm capable of doing that. Looking at just at my hand, I can see, how far 3.5 inches is. But not every player can do that. So it's a bit harder for a less experienced player to do it, but it's easier for more experienced players to do it. But some people would prefer the approach where you simply have to guess and have to declare and have to get it right, and you leave yourself you leave yourself open to your opponent maybe saying, no, you didn't achieve that. And I think there is definitely a camp within the infinity world. There's definitely a camp of people who would rather be able to catch you out and say, look, no, you didn't achieve that. I'm going to shoot at you with the TR bot now because you got it wrong. And then there's maybe a bit of an argument there. Hopefully that those few examples gave you an idea of what the difference is by playing with the idea of intentionally working out where things are compared to not doing it in that way. So let's move on to my next talking point. Let me ask you this. Have you sat down to play a war game, an individual particular match, a game, with somebody that you didn't like, or somebody that you really wanted to prove a point to? You wanted to show that you're better than them, or you're at a tournament and you really need to win this round because you want to do well at this tournament. And in that game, there's a bit of pressure. You want to be the winner, and to win, you've got to get certain advantages. So if your opponent slips up by moving a model in such a way that extra arrows are going to catch them out that they didn't expect, or that they move in range of a mine or crazy koala that they weren't intending to, or they're trying to engage multiple arrows at the same time and they've moved the model a little bit too far, well, in order to achieve your goal, which is to beat this person emotionally, you are probably going to want to catch them out. And in fact, if you're a particularly, don't want to use the word dickhead, but I suppose something like that is appropriate if you want to twist the knife a little bit and sort of just emotionally go, haha, gotcha, well, I'm going to arrow with this guy now, just to make them feel a bit stink and sort of throw them off psychologically, well, that may arise. Now, this isn't really possible when you're playing with the intent, the abstract way of doing it, where your opponent is simply just telling you what they want to achieve. But an argument could be made for the opposite side of things, where the person on the other side of the table is simply going around and exactly and very precisely moving all their guys in a way that that they never get caught out because they can't. So some people, when they first encounter that type of play, can feel a bit aggrieved. But I want to point out that everyone's on the same level. You may also say to respond to me then, well, everybody's still on the same level with playing without using that, that version of infiNity. And that's fine too, but it results in some other problems that we sort of need to discuss. So one really big and important argument that comes up from the, I'm going to start calling them the intent camp, is that by playing the game in that intentional, conversational, abstract way, you avoid messing around and spending a lot of time measuring things and working out where line of sight is. And line of sight is open information. Now, in this thread that we're talking about here, I mean, it's a massive thread, and one issue which people are arguing about, I think, that I'm not really going to touch on this video, is whether line of sight is open information from every angle at every point in time. There's another recent video that came out from somebody that I don't want to talk about in this video, and I don't want to link to it, but you may have seen it, where they're saying stuff like, okay, if you move your model and you're trying to retain cover, you can't ask your opponent whether you have cover or not. You have to sort of ensure that you do yourself, and then we find out. And I can understand. I mean, that's fair. It's fair for everybody to play that way, but what you're inviting there is an argument about whether you have or not. Because coming back to that situation I talked about before, is where if there's any sort of desire on one part to one player to win and gain advantage, as there usually is, of course your opponent is going to prefer to say, well, I don't think you have cover. Almost like when you're playing, or when you're watching professional cricket or soccer or something like that. Of course, the team that's on one side is going to put their hand up and appeal to their view on the matter, whether it's a penalty or not a penalty. You have an investment in that. You have an emotional stake in it. So if I want my model to have cover and you want it to not have cover, we're both going to argue our own side of things, and we're going to get out the measurements and get out the lawyers and make a case and have an argument about it. But if we started out by saying, I'm going to move my model starting from total cover in such a way that I can see your model while retaining cover, can I achieve that? Yes or no? Oh, yes, I can. Well, that's what's going to happen then. So by doing that, yep, we're playing the game a certain way. There may be some disadvantages to that, but at the very least, you have the advantage of avoiding that rather negative outcome. The next point I want to make is about the game Simon Says. You remember when you're in school, and it's primary school, and the teacher gets all the kids to play a game, and it's a game where you're given these directives, these imperatives. Simon says, touch your hands. Simon says, touch your shoulders, touch your elbow. Oh, yeah, I didn't say Simon says, and you follow the instruction anyway, so you're out. So what you're trying to do in that game is simply respond to the imperatives, but only the ones where it's Simon says. And as soon as you hear something which isn't begun with Simon Says, then you've made a mistake if you follow that imperative. So that's a great game with kids because it teaches them attentiveness, it teaches them listening skills, it teaches them a little bit of patience as well. So the best way to win that game is to go slowly and to listen very carefully and try to avoid the impulse of making your responses too quickly. So you quickly see all the other kids, you're being knocked out of that game because they tried to follow the instructions too quickly, and they developed a habit. Would you want infiNity be a game like that, though? Would you want, as adults, for us to play a game which is really more intended to be a strategy game and comparing overall ideas, tactics, understanding of the game, and reducing that in some way to a game where it's about, being the last person to be caught out? I don't think so, and I certainly wouldn't want to play that kind of game. I wouldn't want to play a game where people are moving through the battlefield, and as soon as they make an error in judgment, they forget about my sniper or my mine or my crazy koala, or they've moved into line of sight of more models than they expected, that I punish them. Because I would rather win by using superior strategy and tactics and having a better game plan, as opposed to win because they made a simple, basic Simon Says sort of error that I capitalized on. I wouldn't want the result of that game to be them coming around later and saying, well, I would have got you if I hadn't accidentally moved into that mine. I was beating you until then, and then I lost my very important model, and then it was game over. So if I just hadn't done that, then I would have won. Rather than having that outcome, I'd rather let them off the hook, and I'd rather play the game normally. I also want to say for the record that, coming back to that point earlier about having experience with a game and being able to judge distances and to judge a lot of spatial awareness stuff, I don't want to have that advantage over weaker infiNity players too. There are a lot of people who I regularly play with who are not as good as me when it comes to guessing ranges and actually getting positioning right. So I'd rather use the abstract, intentional, conversational basis of that, because I wouldn't want to beat up them in that regard. I'd rather play a game where I'm trying very strategic ideas in them, and sometimes they fall flat and I lose because of that. So I think that's a really important point. Intent play. So hopefully we've learned a little bit about this. Intent play is this sort of concept that gets thrown around a bit as if both sides of the argument are on even footing. I just want to make it very clear. I might have sounded, objective and charitable to both sides in this video. Of course, I advocate playing with this idea of having intent, the abstract way of playing, a conversational way of playing. of course I advocate that. I don't actually buy into this opposite way of playing. Again, coming back to this argument where some people say, well, it's the rules. The game requires you to play that, and they came up with this some appeals to certain things in the rulebook which seem to indicate that you have to do that. What I want to ask is, imagine there was a rule in the game where if you play Pan-Oceania, you have to use blue dice, and if you play Nomads, you have to use red dice, and you're not allowed to break that rule. Well, all players would be able to see that for practical purposes, you lose nothing by breaking that rule, and you gain quite a lot of convenience by breaking that rule. So we can all agree to dispense with that and play the game in a more convenient and soundly enjoyable fashion just by using the dice that we have on hand that we may have spent money on. Just because people make videos explaining how the game works doesn't mean that they constitute rules. Just because somebody who works for Corvus Belli tells you how the game is meant to be played doesn't mean that you have to play the game that way. I'm not saying that we should all go and create our own versions of the game, in the sense that if I tell you that I'm going to play my Swiss Guard with Ballistic Skill 16, whereas the rules say it's Ballistic Skill 15, it's a lot harder to get away with that, because then we have to ask, well, if we're changing that element, why aren't we changing other elements? And when you encounter newer players, it could be harder to work that out. One might then say, well, okay, if you're going to have a conversational way of playing using intent and abstract movements, won't it be hard to go to tournaments and interact with other people? And to that I agree. And to that I want to reiterate that what has been said a number of times is that before the game begins, why don't you have a conversation about it? And why don't you say, oh, okay, we're going to play a game where we talk about the movements of our models and assume that they are in these positions in an abstract way, or are we going to be sticklers to rules and measurement and just put the models where they lie and work out where it is? Because at the end of the day, I mean, if you're playing me, personally, I will agree to play you in both ways. It's just that publicly I would never advocate the wrong way of doing it, because there are a series of pretty clear arguments as to why one way is favored and the other isn't. Look, guys, this is a convoluted topic. If you do take the time to read what other people have said about this on social media, on YouTube, and on the forums, you'll see a lot of arguing, and you'll see a lot of tangents where the issues split up a little bit, and at different topics, the topic is taken off the rails a little bit. But I just wanted to come back and reiterate my point of view. I want to, again, just direct you to my video where some more practical examples that are discussed when it comes to pie slicing. But at the end of the day, it's better to play the game in a way that avoids the most problems, that is the fairest, that is conducive to a friendly gaming atmosphere, where it's less likely there'll be arguments, where the game is to be more streamlined. We're going to avoid more arguments and pedanticness, and have to spend less time measuring. So of course that's a better way to do it. I also finally want to say that, in my opinion, when I look at which individuals and which people fall on which sides of the arguments, I tend to see the more experienced and probably more level-headed players fall on the side of playing using this intent system, as opposed to the opposite. And that does include certain CB employees and advocates that do not advocate for it, and I stand by that. I mean, people that work for a game aren't necessarily particularly good at the game or have the best opinions about it. I know that's controversial, but you guys know me. I'm a controversial dude. I say this stuff all the time. And I know some of you come to my YouTube channel just to hear that kind of stuff. See and hear somebody talking about something which is not always the norm or not always accepted. If you have any specific polite questions, I might answer them. As always, sometimes people email me, sometimes I reply, sometimes I don't. And try not to be offended if I don't respond to everything. It's been a bit quiet lately with bat reps and analysis. I've had a lot of other stuff going on, and I've missed the opportunity to play some games lately, but hopefully there should be some more games coming up. Still really enjoying infiNity. I've been playing it for a couple of years now, and such a fun game. And all of the games that I play, by the way, in my bat reps, are played with my local guys, and we do play in the way I described earlier. We do actually say, hey, I'm moving my model here without actually moving that model and just asking what it can see, what it can't see, what can see it, what can't see it, what errors it's going to take. And that's how we play, and we really enjoy that. We have a really good time with that. We have no issues with it whatsoever. I'm not too sure how it works with the guys overseas, what their experience is like, but I can't imagine what it would be like. So we'll leave it at that. Thanks for listening to the talk. We'll see you again soon.